So in this video, we want to explore a little bit further our issues of identity that we have been talking about thus far in this unit. It is important, as we said, for you to understand all that you bring to the table, all that you are, believe, and have experienced that make you who you are as a person. You're a complex being, just like other people. They've had different experiences than you, and they're equally complex. So understand that complexity. In understanding that complexity, it allows us to begin to understand the complexity of somebody else. Understanding our identity in the world in which we live is important. As you would have seen in the video, Marshall McLuhan's famous statement, "The medium is the message," rings true for us because we are the medium of the message that we are trying to communicate. You are part of that message. Sometimes you're even more important in how you say something and what you bring as a communicator than even what you're saying. So, just like we have been speaking about in our previous section, it is important to begin to deal with these so that we can make sure that the message we're communicating is really getting across. So we need to understand who you are. And these are really barriers, potentially, to intercultural communication. Who are you really? What is your identity? And who is the other person that I'm communicating with? Do I even know that? As Socrates once said, "Know thyself. The unexamined life is simply not worth living." And so, how do we begin to figure out who I am? What are the steps that I need to take in figuring that out? We want to talk through some of those briefly. We could say that our identity is multifarious. It is not any singular aspect of our lives. And so there's a few different things that we can look at as we come at this idea of how we determine our identity and who we are as individuals and as people. One thing we can say about our identity is that it's created through communication. It's created through the ways in which people tell us we are, the expectations that they have about who we are as individuals. Our identity is created in spurts. It is often said that the college years, the university years between 18 and 22, those are the years that we are finding our identity. You hear people say things like, "I'm just trying to find out who I am. I'm just trying to become the person that I want to be." It is often at this age that people determine their religious identity. Are they going to follow a religion or not? Are they going to follow the religion of their parents or not? And those types of decisions. So at times in our lives, our identity issue is more pertinent than other times. We hear the term in society today, an identity crisis, which happens at perhaps a little bit older age, where people begin to wonder about who do they want to be for the rest of their life, and reflecting upon the things that have gone before them. Our identities are also multiple. We're not any one thing. If you're familiar in Christian circles, sometimes people use the term Sunday Christian, and that delineates somebody who acts one way on a Sunday and another way the rest of the week. And that could be true of many different types of approaches to life. So depending on the group that we are identifying with at the time. At work, we might be one way. At home, we might be another. At church and community, we might be one way. And at sports events, we might be another. So we have these multiple identities. These identities are also influenced by society. What is the expectation in society for you to act and behave? Some of that might be determined by your vocation. If you have a certain vocation, people expect you to respond in a certain way. These identity issues are also dynamic. As we've said, they're multiple, but they're also dynamic, which means just because you have been a certain way doesn't mean that that's always the way things are going to be for you. As we've said, there are times in life where people begin to take stock and think about who they are as a person, the events that have occurred in their life that have made them who they are. They take stock of those, and sometimes through counseling and through therapy, people are actually able to overcome and even to change some of who they are. And very importantly, we'll come back to this before the end, identity is developed differently across different cultures. In very westernized cultures, children, for example, are often taught to be very assertive from a young age. They're taught to take responsibility. They're taught to think independently and to speak up when they want to say something. Now, that is not true across many, in fact, most of the cultures of the world. That is not acceptable behavior for children to assert themselves and to claim their territory, if you will. And so these identities are developed differently in different cultures depending on the values, which we've already spoken about, that people may have. So it's important to see how this permeates a large portion of our life. You've heard it already in the videos that you've watched in previous weeks, but I think some of this is very pertinent when we're talking about dealing with the way in which people would perceive who we are. For example, right now I live in the US, and quite often people would say things like, we're glad that you came here from the country of Africa. Or they might say something like, how far is South Africa from Nigeria? You know, did any of your friends get Ebola? You know, any of those kinds of things. And part of that is because there is a perception of Africa that exists in people's minds that formulates their version and their story, to use the nomenclature that we've been using in this class, that informs what they think of you. And so when I show them pictures like this and I say, well, Africa is actually a pretty big place, they're often surprised by that. It's also interesting to me how often when it comes to the Bible, the Christian scriptures, which we as Christians hold very dearly, how often our perceptions actually affect the way in which we even read the Bible. Depending on our cultural backgrounds, depending on the things that we've been taught and the identity that we have been given, and how that has been presented scripturally, biblically, that affects the way in which we see other people as well. Let me give you one example of that. This comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. I've given you the English text and then the Greek text, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. But this is a common passage. If you've been in church your whole life, you would have heard this before. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Now, if you've had any experiences like mine, this passage or this verse that is often spoken about is often seen as a very individualistic thing. So the emphasis is towards me. Do I not know that my body is a temple? So I'm one of many different temples that are out there. Your body's a temple, my body's a temple, everyone else's body is a temple as well. And the idea often within that is that, we shouldn't do anything that's going to pollute or corrupt this temple that I have, being my body. But that is a very individualistic way of looking at the scriptures, and is actually not consistent with what the text is actually saying. That's why I've given you the Greek text here, not because I expect you to know all these funny Greek words, but because it actually does point to some of the issues that we're speaking about here. The word I've underlined there, the first word there, oidate, actually the third word in the sentence, is actually a plural form of the word you. So it would almost be like saying you all, or y'all, as they might say in other places in the world. So do you all not know? And he's talking to a group of people. Otitosoma humin, which means that your body is a naos, which is the singular term for the word temple. So what he's saying here is that all of us together are one temple, not individually we are several temples. Now, how does this change the way in which we view the text? Well, it means that we together as a Christian body, as the body of Christ, if you will, we together are God's temple, not individualistically, not all about me and my privatized kind of faith, but we as a community are God's people. And if we really truly thought of that as our identity, I wonder how much that would change about the way in which we view life and church. Let me give you a few other things about our social and cultural identity that I think is important for us to consider and think through as we close off our time in this video. Think about your gender identity. These are often shaped by society once again, through movies and through media. We affirm or we deny these stereotypes. How we see gender is not always the way other people see it. And so we need to understand that the gender expectations on societies vary, and that definitely formulates who we are as people. Age, people see age very differently. You know, are you too old to wear skinny jeans? Well, who says, right? Well, our culture seems to define that there is a certain age where certain clothing is appropriate, but others may not see it that way. And so, what do we do with our elderly? In Western cultures, the elderly are often shipped off to old age homes and they're kind of left alone. But in other cultures around the world, predominant cultures around the world, the elderly are seen as being very, very important in the upbringing of the next generation. There is no separation of the generations as much as we see it sometimes in the Western world. Ethnicity, we've already spoken about that. But it's important to bear that in mind, especially if you travel abroad. The way in which people view ethnicity is very different from place to place. Physical ability, that forms part of your identity. Even the words that we use when we talk about people being physically disabled, for example, that's a label that we kind of give to people who are not able to perform some of the functions that we might as a society say that's what regular people are doing. So you are disabled. What does that do to the identity of somebody who has a physical ailment such as that? Maybe can't walk or can't see the way in which other people can, and so we call them disabled. It's almost as though we put them to the periphery of our society. Religions, our religious identity. How do you view people of other religions? We live in a day today of ISIS or IS, depending on how you define it. And there's a lot of extremism and terrorism, and we throw words around like that as well. And people have formulated opinions about certain religious groups on the basis of that. How accurate or fair is that? What about class? We might say, well, we don't have a class system the way that the Hindu caste system might work, or the way in which the class system in the UK once worked. Well, we pretty much do, because we base our class on socioeconomic status. And so if somebody has a high-paying job and they live in a good area, we see them in one way. And if they live in another area and they have a low-paying job, we see them as something else. That is an identity issue that we need to deal with. And then, of course, finally, nationality. What does it mean to be South African? What does it mean to be Australian or American? How does your national identity inform who you are and how you see others? We all see through the lens darkly. Sometimes we are overly patriotic and we think everything that we do and our country does is wonderful and everything everyone else does is bad. And sometimes we can be overly pessimistic. But our nationality is definitely part of our identity. And again, as you travel abroad, if you do, this will come even more to the fore. So a person cannot divorce themselves from these realities. You are the gender you are the age that you are, etc., etc. But an awareness of them can greatly enhance or diminish your ability to communicate across cultures, depending on how you view yourself because of that, and how you view the other. So hopefully that is a good introduction to the unit this week.